Very impactful. Colleagues, welcome to this side event. My name is Tom Bilo. I'm director of UNDP's Sustainable Finance Hub, and I'll be moderating the session today. The topic is tapping into innovative financing instruments to accelerate sustainable development, a roadmap to just development finance. It's a great topic, right at the heart of the Summit of the Future discussions, as you know, in the lead up also to the UNFCCC COP, where finance will be a big focus, and of course into next year, where we have the Finance for Development Conference in Spain in June. So a great topic, a fantastic lineup as well. It's a lineup of many different stakeholders, all with some brilliant perspectives to bring. And towards the end, we've got an exciting launch of Egypt's integrated financing strategy, which means I have to keep everyone to time. The minister has already made it very clear I need to be brutal with timekeeping. When your time is up, I will say I'm very sorry. If you go over 30 seconds, I'll say I'm sorry. And if you go over 45 seconds, I will say I am not sorry. So please keep to time. With that, I'm so excited to hand over to our keynote speaker, Her Excellency Rania Al-Mashhad, Minister of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation of the Government of Egypt. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. And just at the beginning, I want to welcome everybody. It's a close to that also features very heavily within the Summit of the Future. We're talking about multi-stakeholder engagement in financing, not just typical sources of financing, but also innovating financing, which includes the blended, and we keep on talking about blended. And I think in the session that I attended before, I said, how can we blend when still many countries have debt and the cost of financing is high? So these are issues that I hope today we will be able to discuss. Also, when we talk about financing, it's financing to address sectoral development gaps. And here with UNDP, I'm very happy that we have UNDP and also the EU represented by EIB, both of them very important partners to the government of Egypt, as well as everybody here who's in the room. But when we talk about sectoral development gaps, we're talking about also items related to addressing multi-dimensional poverty. We're talking about also youth. We're talking about inclusion. We're talking about gender. So there's a multiple and host of topics that are very, very important for countries in identifying these sectoral development gaps. And then comes the second part is how can we utilize resources effectively to finance these gaps. But financing is not only on the government, it's also related to IFIs, MDBs, private sector coming in, and then how can we through concessional finance also bring in the private sector, but as I mentioned earlier, with the very, very tough aspect of debt and the high cost of financing. There's something else, which two more points, and I'll end there so that Tom doesn't step in. The first one is that when we talk about financing, it should be an integrated framework, and that's why I'm very happy that at the end of the session, the work that we did with UNDP, a multi-stakeholder approach where domestic resource mobilization, capital flows, concessional finance, all elements come together to be able to put into account the financing strategy of the country. I'm very happy that we have the envoy from COP29 here with us, because climate finance is another very important aspect and element related to the overall strategy of sectoral development gaps, but also different types of financing that comes into it. Earlier this week, I put a framework that I hope I will be able to implement as now Minister of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation. My portfolio expanded a bit, but the three key drivers for this strategy or framework is underpinned by using data-driven and evidence-based policy to address these sectoral development gaps. Number two, building a future resilient economy through pushing macroeconomic stability and implementing structural reforms that increase competitiveness as well as push the green transition and macro-fiscal resilience. And then finally, optimizing resource allocation through this integrated financing framework and many other aspects. So this is just a nutshell of what I feel is a proper identification of a framework. In order to achieve this, I need everybody in the room to chip in, and everybody has a role, and that's the idea of not just national coordination, but also international partnerships and international cooperation. I will stop here, and I just want to thank my two co-hosts, UNDP and also the EU. Egypt's relationship with the EU has been pushed to a comprehensive and strategic relationship last March. And EIB, I'm very happy to have Marcus with us. You've been in a journey with us since COP27 on Egypt's NWEFI, the Nexus of Water, Food and Energy platform, but also the EU and the US and what they are doing with respect to competitiveness at home is also affecting our competitiveness across borders. So maybe that's another topic that we can, I'm sure will come in the discussions here at the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'm now going to hand over to the co-hosts of the event to deliver their opening remarks. And first, Dr. Abdallah Al-Dardari, the Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for the Arab States of UNDP. Over to you.
Thank you. Not much to add, actually, after Your Excellency. We are living in times of high interest rates and high cost of borrowing, narrow fiscal space, and challenging climate. And at the same time, we don't see achievements on the SDGs. We see the SDGs receding rather than progressing. Nonetheless, and add to that political crises, geopolitical challenges, and all of this. So why financing now? We need to turn the development gaps that we need to identify precisely into opportunities for investments. We need to bring low-cost, effective money into those development gaps and turn them into the places where young people can be empowered to create their businesses, for the governments to invest in infrastructures, and to make sure competitiveness can rise again. Competitiveness in the region is not as good as we want it to be, at least in the Arab region. You may know that total factor productivity in the Arab world today is 50% of what it was in 1980. And if we don't fix that with smart financing that can bring money to the highest return on investment in the forms of competitiveness and productivity, and turning the gaps into opportunities, we will not make it. Pouring more money through just borrowing is no longer the option. Bringing money in a smart way, in a blended way, into the right areas and the right gaps is the way forward. And we need to measure those successes by how many jobs we create, how circular an economy we create, how sustainable an economy we create, and how much young find themselves engaged and they feel this is a new social contract that they own rather than they are just implementing. I stop here. Rest assured, Excellency, and everyone in the room, you know, UNDP is your partner with everyone else. Not a single one of us alone can do this. But we do our part, just like in full partnership with these great partners around this room. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abdallah. Now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Marcus Berndt, the head of the European Investment Bank Group representation to the US and to the UN. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for everybody who joins this discussion. You didn't have much to add, so what should I do now as the third speaker? But I just want to say three things then. First, it's great to be together here with these excellent partners of ours. In Egypt, we have indeed gone through a long way. Since 1979, the EIB and the Union is cooperating and has invested 15 billion in this beautiful country, supporting infrastructure, but also, as was rightly said, very importantly, the vibrant private sector, which can be more vibrant everywhere, including in Europe, obviously. And second, the UNDP, which we have had very good cooperations, for example, in Ukraine, where since 2014 we are running a joint recovery program, investing in schools and hospitals, which sadly has become an even more important mission since 2022. So we very much welcome the summit and this conference in particular, as a member of the multilateral family, I think this summit is really important to us to find ways to strengthen the frameworks of the financial system and the multilateral system to become a stronger one. As you know, the European Union itself is a multilateral organization, or started as such, which brought together very diverse partners of different strengths and sizes. So we firmly believe in the fact that working together brings us much further than working against each other. And that's why this summit is so important for us. In these diverse times, it is very important that we continue deepening our collaboration as MDBs with the UN system and with our partners and the likes. We are here to commit to focus on 5 areas: scaling up financing capacity, boosting climate action, catalyzing private sector mobilization, as was said, as very important, enhancing development effectiveness, and strengthening country level collaboration and co-financing. And this last point seems self-evident, but it's not so easy to implement, right? How do we make sure that these country platforms are not becoming talk shops or even worse, lecturing shops? But how do we make sure that they become a mechanism to truly help us achieve shared objectives? And that brings me back to Egypt, where the INFF that was mentioned is truly one example of a successful international partnership. It's a model that helps us maximize effectiveness, that helps us to find each one of us to find our leverage each of your partners in terms of our respective instruments and our capacities and synergies. And most importantly, INFF is owned and led by Egypt, which makes this a very good example going forward. You mentioned climate. Of course, we know there's a lot of work to be done. At least, one can easily give up, but we also have to see the positive side. The multilateral development banks have jointly increased significantly our climate finance. We also have indeed invested significantly in instruments that went beyond traditional financing, as it was mentioned, engaged in innovative solutions like blended finance, debt swaps, through initiatives like the EU-led Global Green Bonds Initiative, MDBs, and DFIs work together together with UNDP as well, on green bond issuances. And I think there is a great development in that area. And it's working. Between 22 and 23 alone, the MDB group jointly managed to double the mobilization of private sector financing. So we are on the right track. Of course, we know there's not room for complacency. We can only succeed if we not only work tirelessly, but if we deepen cooperation, and if we accelerate innovation, both technological and financial. And that's why we're here. So very much looking forward to the discussion, and let's move forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much to our keynote and co-hosts for those remarks. They reminded me of something I heard a famous Minister of Finance from Timor-Leste once say. She said, "Finance is too important to be left to finance institutions alone." And I think our next panel takes us into that realm by bringing together some finance institutions, development institutions, and other international organizations to focus on getting some solutions on the table, some ways forward so that we can break the deadlock that we've heard about, both on finance and on SDG progress. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce each speaker as they speak. And our first speaker is Dr. Mahmoud Mahuddin, the high-level climate change champion for Egypt, UN Special Envoy on financing the SDGs, and IMF Executive Director for Arab States. A very long title. It almost took up 2 minutes in itself. But very happy to have you, Mahmoud.
We won't subtract.
And much more, actually.
Yes, more to do. Mahmoud, we met outside. You raised with me this issue about the fallacy of the absence of bankable projects. You talked to me about debt swaps. You've got lots of ideas. Mahmoud, over to you.
Right, thank you so much, and never fall in the mistake by briefing the good moderator of your intentions. But I'm happy to come after the excellent speakers just now. Thank you so much, honorable ministers, co-hosts, and excellencies, and everybody in the room. So after the good words reflected by the speakers, I can just agree with them and finish within the time, or I can just try to put some challenges perhaps in the implementation of all of what they mentioned. And I think I would take it first from what my good brother, Dr. Abdullah Dardari mentioned. Two things, I would say. One on the competitiveness, and as an Arab, I shouldn't be feeling offended. If you are an Arab in the room and you felt offended by what Abdullah mentioned, please read the Mario Draghi report on the competitiveness of Europe. You will get worried as a neighbor, because there are fears of gaps of knowledge, R&D, energy, and security. And if they are not going to put their act together, supported by $900 billion or 800 billion euro a year, they will be in trouble. This is their word. And he said it's existential case when it comes to Europe. As a neighbor of Europe, trade, finance, investments comes handy. Happy to be a neighbor to the EIB, appreciate the work. But here, issues related to R&D innovation. If we move from Europe to the World Bank, the recent middle-income countries report is telling us about invest in innovation, in disbursement of knowledge, and make sure that you are not really forgetting the R&D while you are at it. And again, this goes back to competitiveness and taking matters related to data systems more seriously. On the NOAFI, which could be disguised by the acronym, which the minister coined nicely, but this is about the three crises we are facing: on energy, on water, and food. Food security, we know that 350 million people are suffering from hunger. 50 million are facing famine. Energy, there is some sort of good progress there, especially in renewables, but I'm very much worried about water. And the coalition and the commission led or co-led by Ngozi, Mariana Mazzucato, and others are telling us, be careful with this issue of water, especially if you are in peace, discussions and all of that, because that requires more investments. Otherwise, we'll be seeing more wars into that. Related to climate change, if you don't have water, the ecosystem that decarbonizes naturally the emissions, we're going to be losing 30% of it. So I think here we are in search for a metric. How can we deal with that? Very quickly in the 3 points that you raised. One fallacy, and that will be fixed, I hope, by the World Bank. Yeah, my good neighbor and a good friend here. People always say, well, we have the money, assets under management is huge, we are investment banks, we have deep pockets, we have institutional investors, but you developing economies do not have bankable, investable projects. Actually, the NOAFI project in Egypt, the regional economic commissions with the UN under the leadership of the SG and the DSG, the work on Green Smart project that the minister is co-leading now in Egypt, and this is a big initiative under the auspices of the Egyptian president, is providing answers of thousands of projects that are bankable and investable, that they are telling everyone you are wrong. There is a pipeline of bankable and investable projects. What is missing? Business environment, rule of law, issues related to governance, matters related that should be solved by the successor of the Doing Business report when they are talking about business enablers in the field and leveling the playing field. This is very much important here. The second part, and very quickly, and actually there is the work on the regions summarized by a good report, and it's good that we have the envoy from COP29 with us, because that's going to be under their auspices when it is going to be launched in Baku. Is called From Assets to Flows. Projects in mitigation, adaptation with SDG impact in the field that are basically telling everyone, and Mark Carney actually has been behind this work with us, and we're happy that we are working with them. Debt swaps, fantastic transactions from Belize to Seychelles. Latest report coming from the IMF, don't celebrate transactions. It's very much transactions heavy. We need a system. We need to be methodical about it, and we need really to have a policy, and we need to check where exactly the priority of using debt swaps or not. And the minister gave a good hint to this issue. The very final one, no, I don't like to offend anyone, especially there could be a majority in the room, CBAM folks from the EU system, from the UK, and potentially in the US, the cross-border adjustment mechanism. We know the risks and costs in the short term. This could be impacting important industries, especially if we're talking about food, fertilizers. And here, this is an issue of coordination that is very much required because we are around 1 year plus 2 months away from implementation. So that kind of work on the CBAM in particular needs really to go beyond exemptions and transactions into having a good understanding of what is needed to be done. We don't need to have negative spillovers. We don't need really to have some chaos in the systems that could jeopardize the future of flourishing industry that have already plans for cutting their emissions and decarbonize, but the CBAM may be a bit of disruption. Could be a positive one if it is well coordinated, or it could be a disaster if it is just left to the dynamic that they are in it. Having said that, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahmoud, really setting the tone for the discussion with some really concrete suggestions for moving forward. And in that vein, we're now going to hand over to Ms. Anna Berde, who is the Managing Director for Operations of the World Bank. Over to you.
Much, and let me just also express my appreciation to the organizers. Minister, wonderful to see you, colleagues. And the World Bank is really happy to be here. I also just want to say this is my first meeting for over the next 4 or 5 days or so. And I have to say you're setting a very, very positive vibe, direct, clarity, but also all of you have talked about how no one can do it alone. And that's something that's been on my mind over and over again, not just today, for the past year, really. So I think we're in a very different place in recognizing that, speaking about it. So I just want to thank you for that. I also just want to acknowledge really how much progress Egypt's been making in tackling some of the most difficult issues. And we've talked about those issues, and I want to emphasize a few of them. But what I'd like to really do is emphasize, why do we need to talk about blended finance? Well, we need to talk about it because we know we don't have one source of finance that's the magic bullet. Abdallah talked about the high level of indebtedness. We know that public resources are also constrained. Many countries around the world have so many competing demands on their space. And we also know that the private sector, especially after a high interest environment, have a lot of choice. So they look at, where do I want to go when I have so much choice and the interest rates remain high? So we do need to think about creative ways of getting there. And I think that's why it's so important for us to talk about this. So we talk a lot about, the fact that there's not enough volume going in to developing countries from the private sector. And it is true. You guys know the numbers, but I always find it sometimes very important to remind ourselves. What we see in 2023, the global climate finance reached about 1.27 trillion around the world. 1.27 trillion, that's a huge number. Except we believe that we need 6.2 trillion annually by 2030 to deliver to net zero. So even if you don't get to that number, somewhere in between would be nice, but that's still about 3 times where we are. So we do need to know that we know that we need to think about options. I also always like to think about the fact that it's not just money that the private sector brings. The private sector actually brings the innovation that we otherwise don't have, the technical know-how that we otherwise don't have, and create jobs. So we need to think about the private sector as a partner in that sense. So what I'd like to do today is maybe just demonstrate a little bit on how we think about constructing financial architecture through the work that we have been doing together with Egypt and under Egypt's leadership. And I hope I leave with you a demonstration of foundational aspects that need to be addressed, but also, as the minister mentioned, the need for these interlinkages to constantly be considered, because you make progress in one area, but unless you make progress in another one, you're not bringing it fully together. So I want to start with analytics, and the minister mentioned this, the importance of data. Without data, it's very hard to know what is our baseline and where do we need to go. So together with Egypt, we prepared a country climate and development report, which was very helpful in identifying something that a lot of people think can't be done, but we strongly and we know can be done, which is you can have economic growth and climate action together. You don't have to choose. And I think an analysis is foundational, and that's why putting the first underpinning on that analytical base was important. The second thing is we entered into a programmatic approach on supporting Egypt in its reform journey. And here I would also say that reforms are totally foundational, because without reforms, it's very hard to create that environment, that level of certainty that the private sector also looks for when they're looking to see to invest longer term in a country. So just some of the strong reforms I think Egypt has been pursuing that are really important, that are helping. Minister mentioned it, the need for a stable macroeconomic environment and the importance of macroeconomic planning in the midst of it. The reduction of the role of the state and making that level playing field for the private sector through the state ownership policy, enhancing the competition and streamlining the business environment processes, spoken here also by my neighbor and my friend. And then looking at state-of-the-art monitoring, verification, and reporting. Again, these types of enabling measures are foundational. So that's very much how we look at the foundational aspects. On the climate finance side, definitely opportunities there. We believe renewable energy is taking off, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, but we also need to think about other infrastructure like transmission, distribution. We need to think about carbon markets. I know you're going to cut me off. I see it over there on you. And I just wanted to finish off by one important point, which has to do with partnership. And maybe we'll come back to it, but no one truly can do it alone. And I think this is really where we have to pull on all resources. And we've introduced a bunch of new innovative products, including guarantee platforms, livable planet funds to try to buy down the cost, to get more concessionality, and just to tip a project from maybe not being seen as too viable to viable. And I also listened very carefully to what Mahmoud said, which I believe so much. It's not really a lack of bankable projects. It's actually a lack of, in my view, preparation, resources to get those projects prepared, and then speed, agility, and transparency to get the projects done. And that's where we at the World Bank over the last few years have been really trying to reform ourselves to become what we call the better bank. You'll hear a lot about that this week. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to move straight on to our next speaker, Mr. Pradeep Kurakul-Lasouria, who is the Executive Secretary of the UNCDF, the United Nations Capital Development Fund. Over to you, Pradeep.
Thanks, Tom. You know, I'm reflecting a lot on conversations yesterday and today, and of course, if everything that we are currently doing is working, we wouldn't be here. So let's talk a little bit about what's not working, and let's get down to a level of specificity so that maybe collectively we can find a solution to that. I think while there's been a lot of effort with the existing institutional structures to support development, SDG achievement in many countries around the world, when it comes to last mile, neglected, underserved areas, there is an elephant in the room here, which is the risk profiles that we're talking about simply are not conducive to the kind of institutions that we have. Even with various attempts to try and accommodate that risk, we know that at the end of the day, when it comes to, you know, what Moody's would classify as C category investments, we're not really spending a lot of money there in the form and shape that's required to lift the bottom up. And I think this has to do with the architecture itself, which brings me to my current role at UNCDF. I'm actually flabbergasted that the UN has been sitting with the UNCDF for 60 years and hasn't figured out a way to deploy it, because it's the only UN entity that can deploy blended finance instruments. And most importantly, it's not credit rated, which means it can, and I think it was always designed to go in and absorb risks and set the stage for those institutions that then follow suit with the larger amounts of concessional finance. It's almost like an off-balance sheet de-risker for the MDBs. So I'm quite excited to be at UNCDF. It's only my 5th month now, and I'm trying to figure out ways in which it can actually augment and complement the existing architecture by the very capabilities that it was designed for, something which it hasn't been doing for 60 years, if I may say that. So I think, how are you going to do this? Of course, it is by taking risks and going in where no one else wants to go. About 6 months ago, we worked in Tanzania at the subnational level and helped the Water Authority at the subnational level issue a water bond. Everyone said we were crazy to do it because it was not even secured. Well, it was successful with about $1 million of investment, more than $20 million of investment of a bond revenues were raised, 65% of it from the domestic market, not even from international markets. So when people talk about domestic markets not being ready, I think there is more to it than one may think. Secondly, I think ultimately this is about bringing all our capabilities together and joining off the dots by making sure that we use all the instruments that we have at our disposal in a way that also cuts across sometimes the time that is spent between A and B. There's always a gap, but we need to try and close that out. If the GCF or the JEF is able to come in and put some grant money in, that must soon be followed by perhaps a guarantee or some kind of equity that's needed. And that doesn't happen, that connectivity doesn't happen. And finally, I would say that ultimately, we're not going to crowd in private finance unless we use the right instruments and use instruments in a way that you can also absorb some of those losses rather than having instruments, even as guarantees, that are pegged to market returns, which simply do not work because the uptake of that is also limited. So let's see how we can bring all of these instruments together in a way that actually create markets and actually perhaps even create markets for some of the large institutions that otherwise would not be able to go there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pradeep. And now over to our colleague from UNICEF, Ms. Natalia Winder-Rossi, who's the Global Director, Social Policy and Social Protection. Over to you, Natalia.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really, on behalf of UNICEF, let me express our sincere gratitude for the invitation, Minister Ahmad and co-hosts, and really to share UNICEF's contribution, commitment to really strengthening finance systems for children. And you mentioned the gaps on many sectors, and of course, our specific contribution is to trying to shorten that gap, particularly around social sectors for children. Also, if you allow me to really commend the government of Egypt for the commitment to this agenda for the innovation that has been able to see, gathering us today, but across the different actions at country level. And really their commitment to shield many of the vulnerable households, including children, from the impacts of many crises. For example, through your commitment to the social protection programs and expansion of those programs, even in context of economic distress and multiple priorities. We definitely at UNICEF understand and very much acknowledge that protecting social spending in the current context is very complex. It requires multiple choices and prioritization. The gaps continue to widen, and that is right now making the reality is that a third of children across regions and across contexts do not have access to essential services. A third of the children population do not have access to essential services, including health, education, and social protection. And I think as we navigate the different possibilities, I think we need to ensure that we are placing social sectors, social inclusion, children, many at the center of our financing priorities. The investment case is very clear, but also sometimes the actions around investment is not always there. And I think we all are here because we understand that it's not easy, that we've tried to do many things, but I think there's still space to continue to deepen our work on a couple of elements. One is to optimize the use of those investments, particularly domestic financing. We know that they're there. We know that we need to make them work. We need to protect minimum spending. I have to come back to the examples of social protection. Just last week, there was a new report that ILO launched, as you know, on the state of social protection, and there's a specific chapter that we did with ILO on children, where from all the investment on social protection, only less than 4% goes to children. And if we really want to are serious about protecting vulnerable populations and really investing in human capital, we need to start with providing those particular households that are struggling with a lifeline to continue to invest in their economies. But second, I think a very important element, and I think we were touching about issues of governance and the role of public expenditures in de-risking, is the work around equity and transparency. And I think that's one of the key points that I wanted to put on the table. As UNICEF, we've been working with many ministries of finance and social sector ministries to really enhance the credibility of their budgets, the transparency of budgets, as an essential tool to really make sure that we can attract more investment across the board, to really enhance the health of sector budgets and really showcase not only that there's a need for more money and better money, but that there is an ability to really showcase how our resources used and invested. And particularly with Egypt, we've been actively collaborating with the Ministry of Finance on budget transparency, on youth engagement in public budget processes. And this is through a series of data and evidence to really have transparency briefs to show very clearly where resources are going, the impact of those investments, but also to simplify budget processes and making sure that we can have more clear information of how those resources are being used. And really detangle, if you want, the use of resources, particularly in social protection, health, education, and others. And I think we will continue, hopefully, to support that process, including with issues like budget tugging and other types of instruments. One of the important things that I've heard in the previous interventions was the role of collaboration. And we always are asked the question, what is UNICEF doing in public finance? And I think this is precisely the contribution. And given our expertise or our partnership with many social sectors ministries to really help to enhance that credibility, that transparency, and therefore being able to create and de-risk investment, particularly around private sector. So looking forward to continue collaborating, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And I'm going to turn now to our final speaker in this segment, Ms. Silvana Koch-Marin, who is the president and founder of Women Political Leaders. Over to you.
Now it's working. Okay, super. Thank you very much, and thank you for including Women Political Leaders WPL in this session. It's a very, very critical topic, of course. And I'd like to start with just taking us one step back and asking the question, who actually decides on the instruments? Who decides what we're doing? And that, quite obviously so, are the political leaders on local level, on national level, on international levels. But then when you look around who is part of these decision-making processes, who sits around the table, the UN General Assembly, more than 90% of the heads of state and government are men. For ministers of finance, it's not much different. Ministers of economic affairs, also not exactly a situation where we can say the representation, the political representation, mirrors societies. So this is the reason why WPL, Women Political Leaders, exists, because there is the need to have a more diverse political representation, because representation matters. It matters in politics, it matters for the outcomes, it matters in societies. And WPL, together with the World Bank and academic partners, such as the University of Korea and King's College, they're not feminist organizations, we provided the data evidence, totally empirical data, that there is a very clear correlation between legislative output and the representation. What's important is there's first the change in representation and then the change in legislation and policies. Currently, according to World Bank data, women enjoy about 2/3 of the economic and financial rights that men do. And it was Christine Lagarde and others who said, if one were to completely include women in the economy and finance, it would be like adding another China and India to the world economy. So it's a pretty smart thing to look at political representation, given that there is this clear correlation of more women in political leadership, less discrimination by law, more inclusion of women in the economy and finance, improvement for society. It's not only about SDG 5, it's about many other SDGs when we talk about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think that's pretty straightforward. It's innovative, I guess, and it's a very, very important matter going forward to see how can we fundamentally address the issue of an imbalanced financial system. And I don't know how I'm for time, but otherwise I could say one tiny other thing.
15 seconds.
Okay, 15 seconds. From my other hat, I'm part of a commission in Germany which is composed of several former ministers and also the German director to the World Bank, Michael Krake, and others. And we look at the a new scenario for how does Germany's responsibility for the global majority country should look like. And it's a little point, but I think it would fit maybe into the parameters here is rating agencies. Rating agencies, they're not exactly reflecting the global economic system, and there is data, again, provided by World Bank, IMF, that fairer ratings would lead to very different financial situations of those countries. And just by maybe having, again, maybe some rules-based for rating agencies on where are they based, how do they receive their information, are they really knowing, do they know the situations in those countries really that they put ratings forward to? So that's another smaller element. Thank you very much.
Very, very nice. Thank you so much, Silvana, for those comments. This brings this segment to a close. We've heard from a mix of stakeholders, development institutions, finance institutions, other international organizations. And as you'd expect, the solutions being put forward come from many different angles. We've covered public finance, private finance, domestic, international. We've talked about innovations, but also just doing things better. And at the heart of all of this discussion has been a focus on development outcomes. How do we get the finance to the places and the sectors that need it most? So thank you so much to our panelists in that first segment. I'm now going to move us into a segment with more member state perspectives from permanent missions as well as the private sector. So another range of stakeholders that we'll be listening to, focusing again on solutions that can help break the deadlock on finance and the SDGs. Our first speaker, and it's wonderful to have you here, sir, Mr. Elmar Mammadov, Senior COP29 negotiator and co-leader of the Action Agenda initiatives under the COP29 presidency of the Republic of Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much. I would like also to thank organizers and Madam Minister for inviting to this very important, very interesting event. I would like to inform you about 5 principles that we used for designing of Action Agenda global initiatives. First principle that we used to find balance between 3 pillars of climate agenda, between climate finance, mitigation and adaptation. Second principle that we used, again, balance between enhancing ambition and enabling action. Third balance to ensure equally 3 dimensions of sustainable development, economic, environmental, and social. To have in our, number 4, to have in our list not only global initiative, but at the same time regional initiatives. And finally, to ensure harmony between human and nature. And I would like to inform you about one important initiative of COP29 presidency. It's a Baku initiative for climate finance, investment and trade. We would like to bring these 3 important issues, and we are working very closely on this topic with UNCTAD and with UNDP, which are co-leading of this initiative from the UN COP29 UN task force side. This initiative has 5 key pillars. First of all, to align climate finance with sustainable development, climate action with sustainable development. Second, aligning climate finance with trade, and particularly through its productive capacity to promote productive capacity in developing countries. Third element is promotion of climate FDIs, and also taking into account that a lot of developing countries has also natural green comparative advantage, like renewable potentials. We have in our country, in Azerbaijan, a green energy zone, which is rich with renewable potential, and now we are thinking to create on the basis of this zone free economic zones, to transform it into the free green economic zone, to attract investments to this sector, to align through this way climate finance and climate action with job creation. And also one of the key elements of this initiative will be dialogue. We would like to have a big fit dialogue as a part of the biannual World Investment Forum of UNCTAD. And last but not least, to apply this initiative and to implement at the national and regional platforms. And we would like also to use successful experience of Egypt on national platform on water, energy, and food nexus. It's indeed a very important successful success story. At the regional level also, we started to design projects within the framework of special program for economies of Central Asia in our region, and also Central Asian Regional Economic Cooperation nexuses on climate, innovation, and trade to tackle this issue. A key purpose of this initiative, as I already mentioned, to bring together climate finance, investment, and trade. And on 14th of November, after the Leaders Summit, it will be first thematic day. We'll organize a thematic day on finance, investment, trade, because it will be first ever finance, investment, and trade day. It will be as a single integrated day. Until today, in all previous COPs, finance was separate, trade was separate. Now we would like to bring together all these sectors. And indeed, we are ready for close cooperation with Egypt and with all other countries, all international organizations. We would like to bring together to this global platform private sector, public sector, philanthropic organization, and others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Elmar. That was wonderful to hear. I'm now going to move us straight over to Her Excellency Ambassador Marie Antoinette, Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism. Over to you.
Chair, I was hoping I could bargain for 15 minutes, but so I'll try and be as succinct as possible. Chair, the African Peer Review Mechanism, our focus is on governance. And I think one of the questions that have been asked today is, what are the challenges? The African Peer Review Mechanism in last year, 2023, we published the African Governance Report. And the focus of the report was on constitutional changes of government. I will focus on the good news and the bad news on the continent in terms of governance. Now, for us at the APRM, innovative finance is just not a concept. It's necessary towards achieving the SDGs and the African Union's Agenda 2063. What are the good news coming out of the continent? Some countries, as you all know, like Cabo Verde, Rwanda, Zambia, Botswana, the Seychelles, and Kenya, they have attracted substantial foreign direct investment through initiatives such as the Blue and Green Bonds in collaboration with international partners. Egypt, there's some good news coming out of Egypt in terms of the programs like the Takaful and Karama program, the Nexus of Water, Food, and Energy program, and of course the Decent Life initiative. Now I would like to focus on the challenges because I think out of the challenges we need to find real solutions. The AGR 2023 has highlighted a lot of real challenges that's really hindering progress. Current debt management challenges, illicit financial flows, governance issues. Now, when you look at governance issues, we're looking at weak institutions. We're looking at peace and security challenges and recent UCGs in the Sahel region. We're looking at corruption. And part of our work is to conduct targeted review missions, and we publish country reviews. And out of these reviews, we're looking at structural vulnerabilities, fragility, and of course, dynamic vulnerabilities. And of course, all of these challenges hinder our ability to leverage financial resources effectively. I would really like to comment on the comments made, I think, by the first panelist about the risk profile of the continent and the rating agencies. Her Excellency, the Minister, was with us yesterday when we were talking about the creation of the African Credit Rating Agency. The APRM is a custodian of that project, and hopefully by next year we will see the creation of the African Credit Rating Agency. But to achieve that, to reach that point of what we're seeing, the new wave of optimism, it was a long road and 3 long years of pessimism. And that kind of pessimism, I think, speaks to whether the continent has the ability to, at the very least, create an African Credit Rating Agency. Yesterday, we saw some optimism, a lot of optimism, a lot of investment. We're being supported by the development banks on the continent, but all the partners on the continent. So this is a first step and a very good news that I would like to share with the panel this afternoon. So in closing, Chair, been very brief, the challenges and this big opportunity that the African Credit Rating Agency presents to the continent and the opportunities it presents. Chair, I would like to invite everyone to participate in the high-level discussion at the upcoming 3rd Africa High-Level Forum on South and Triangular Cooperation for Sustainable Development. That'll be held in Sierra Leone in early 2025. And this forum also will serve as a continental platform for sharing scalable practices in innovative finance. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. We now turn to our private sector representative, Mr. Craig Coggart, founder, chairman, and CEO of Pegasus. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you so much. And this really is an interesting panel, and listening, lots of comments, but have to be brief as the private sector representative here. I'd say collaboration, as earlier emphasized, is absolutely important. But and we work with, UNCDF, we work with, in the case of Egypt, with UNDP, with our Coral Reef Fund, we work with the Green Climate Fund, work with the World Bank. So I think, and we work as someone who gets money from the Green Climate Fund, we have to deal with our national designated authority. So we work closely with countries. And that's all absolutely critical. But I think as a private sector representative, one of the best roles we shouldn't be asking for is other people to do our work. We can be helpful in setting some of the policies, being involved. When you mention data that the World Bank's doing, and we're doing this with UNDP a lot, figuring out what projects can we finance. So in many cases, getting us involved earlier, I think, can be very helpful. Secondly, I think with the different instruments, as Pradeep mentioned, and we've talked a lot about them, we have to realize there's some projects that frankly don't need help. And I'll be heretical and say, there are things that can get financed. If we can find a private off-taker for something like cold storage, which is needed, we don't need any help. And I think we have to tailor the types of instruments to the most needy, the most vulnerable in the case of UNCDF, or with folks like the World Bank or development banks, to concessional capital that fits the needs. And we shouldn't be wasting that capital. And frankly, I've seen projects which shouldn't have it or should have much less of it. So that's a bit of a heretical view. But we're living in a world that, again, my friend Mahmoud said, we're short resources, we're long on needs. And we have to, I think, very carefully avoid making the wrong investment decisions. And there's this linkage, and one of the things we're very concerned about at Pegasus, we've talked about energy, but we are living in this food, water, cooling, energy nexus crisis, and it's not going to get better. We know that. So I think projects where we're not looking, one of the things we try to do is ecosystem investing, where we're working to solve multiple problems. Because otherwise, I think what Mahmoud said will happen is we will make the wrong policy decisions, we as investors too, in not utilizing the dollars that are scarce to drive lasting sound investments, but also lasting impact change. It may be strange for a private sector person to be saying this, but our investments will work if they're actually having impact too. That's our decided view. And so that has to have systemic change across multiple sectors. If we're just building power grids and they're not connecting to the fundamental needs of people, particularly the most needy, it's not going to work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Craig. And that brings us to the end of those two segments. And just a reflection from me as moderator. Sometimes these discussions can really go in circles, in the doom and gloom of the financial crisis and the development crisis that we face. But this session has really showed that when you bring development institutions and finance institutions together, we can be more solutions-oriented. But even more important is to have country leadership. Country leadership enables development institutions and finance institutions to fuse their work together, to collaborate behind a plan. And that's why it's wonderful that we're moving into our next segment, which will include the launch of Egypt's integrated financing strategies. So, Minister, with that, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for all the panelists. There's a very brief presentation before everybody has a physical copy. But this is work that started over a year ago. It's in collaboration with UNDP and the joint SDG fund, so the UN is strongly present with us. And I need to also take this opportunity to thank the previous minister, my colleague, Dr. Hala Saeed, who started this work with others in government. And at the time, Ministry of International Cooperation was also part of this. And it included other stakeholders, private sector in Egypt, NGOs, as well as other UN agencies, to basically take a look at the holistic view of this. If we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So this is, again, Egypt is committed to achieving Vision 2030, but as many other countries, there's a financing gap that shows up, a funding gap that shows up, and this funding gap keeps on widening, of course, exacerbated by the different shocks. And, you know, I was just in a session before this. These shocks are becoming more frequent, and they're coming more diversified. And they just, of course, the first thing they affect is the fiscal space. And when they affect the fiscal space, we are all struggling to prioritize what to spend on. So between children, between climate, between food, hunger, there's just so much that needs to be done. Again, if we're taking the energy transition or food security, water security, and climate finance, these are additional elements which also affect not just Egypt, but again, the whole emerging markets landscape. The next slide, please. Yeah. This is the we are the first of 18 Arab countries to launch this Egypt's integrated national financing strategy. We introduced this to mobilize sustainable finance, to close the financing gap. It's aligned with Vision 2030, and the idea is to have the right financing approach. And when we say the right financing approach, I think it reflects everything that was discussed over the past almost hour, because again, we saw several sources of finance that are able to create this integrated approach. The next slide, please. Yes, so here we have, again, putting in place a right financing approach. If we think about this. It's aligning funding or moving from funding to financing, so F to F principles, optimizing the alignment of public and private funds within strategic priorities, leveraging private sector investments and optimizing public expenditures to direct resources towards high impact initiatives. And as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, when I'm looking at development gaps, these development gaps are opportunities for investment, but they need to be identified, quantified, empirically feasible for the private sector to take a look at. And that's where the next issue comes, which is adopting right financing to help benefit from diversified financial instruments. And again, from our work with all of you here, there is an understanding of the different financing tools that exist for private sector engagement and for increasing investment and for the structural reforms that we need to implement for governance, rule of law, competitiveness, and so forth. Next. Here's a sort of primary investment areas and actions, just a list which again reflects a set of actions to close this gap. Here, many of the things that were mentioned here and will be mentioned over the next week with Summit of the Future. And what we will be working on at a government level is to work with the different stakeholders to put an action plan and actually operationalize this. So I promise that when we come to UNGA next year and we have a side event, we'll be able to really identify how we implemented, how we've gone from this to implementation. And NOEFI, for those who don't know what it means fulfilling promises. So we will be NOEFIing this action plan. So it's implementing revenues and debt sustainability reforms, undertaking bottom-up SDG costing, scaling up PPPs, greening the banking system, strengthening the digital economy, and also introducing these financial instruments to support priority sectors, improving FDI, and the list goes on. So again, and a very important element related to legislation is how we monitor this process. And again, this is an important element of the integrated financing framework. Next. Again, oversight, data provision, and leaving no one behind. So this is as a ministry that looks into economic development, so we're cross-cutting with all other ministries. So that's where we come in, because we're putting the public investment budget for next year, complementing it with concessional finance or the instruments that would actually blend or bring in investments as well. Data provision, extremely important. We've done voluntary national reviews, more to come. Evidence-based data, we discussed that. Our statistics office needs to provide that. There needs to be improvement in quality data as well. And then leaving no one behind is involving different entities, not just government entities, but councils, the parliament, and many others, so that in this integrated framework, everybody is included in a very governance sort of way. Next. Oh, this is longer than I expected, but the way forward. So we're launching this today. In Egypt, there will be a bigger launch so that every stakeholder can speak exactly to the element that they have contributed to in the document. And when you contribute, you're also held responsible. And that's where the monitoring then comes in later. It's a flexible structure because, again, economies change. Good economists know that we need to be time consistent, and time consistent means that your information set can change, but you need to be aware of that, and you need to communicate that when circumstances change, how you're going to adjust policies and adapt policies to be able to move forward. So we're hoping that this would be a useful tool for policy, a useful tool for investors, a useful tool for trying to identify how to move from development gaps into investment opportunities that, again, would create a common path forwards, and that's where I think it's also a good occasion, as we're talking, or at the beginning of the Summit of the Future, we thought this would be a good place to actually let everybody know that Egypt has this framework, and we look forward to operationalizing it and implementing it. I think this is the QR code, and I look forward to everybody maybe taking a look at this, and we will be together to work. And as I mentioned, next year we are here, hopefully, to show you what we have been able to implement from this INFF. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. And they're being handed round as we speak. Oh, a thicker report awaits us. We look forward to reading that as well. Abdallah, over to you for some reflections.
First of all, congratulations to you and to us, actually. We are very honored and humbled that we had a humble role to play in supporting Egypt in reaching this fantastic level. Maybe to tell a short story. In a different reincarnation in my previous lives, I was Deputy Prime Minister for the economy in my country. I wish I had an INFF at that time. Imagine that you're trying to bring together annual budgets with foreign debt and fiscal sustainability, with private sector investments, and with development priorities, gaps and priorities under one umbrella, and give them a logical connection that becomes the basis for your effective and evidence-based policy, to make it the way to attract private sector investments into the right place, to use the right financial tools and financing tools into that. I didn't have that. And it was a nightmare. And that's why when I joined UNDP, I took an oath, I took it upon myself that I want, at least in the region that I serve, that every single country has that. And to start with Egypt only makes sense. Egypt is the country that will take us all forward in this part of the world. There is no way for failure. For us in Egypt, there is only forward and success. So that is our commitment to you, to Your Excellency, and that we can only do together. Again, I'd like to emphasize that. None of us alone can do this, but all of us together, standing by the minister and the government and the people of Egypt, we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister and Abdallah. That is a fantastic way to end our segments before handing over to closing remarks. It really has emphasized how, despite the doom and gloom, the seriousness of the situation we're in, countries are not waiting to take forward their agenda on financing for sustainable development. And I think this integrated financing strategy is a pure testament to that country leadership. And I hope the momentum and positivity that it's brought to this discussion is something we can carry through into the Summit of the Future, the UNFCCC COP, and the Finance for Development Conference as we move to it next year. So thank you so much for that. With that, I'm going to hand over back to you, Minister, for your closing remarks.
Much to add, except that I find this discussion very rich. I think that, with the different backgrounds, everyone came with a comparative advantage with respect to the comments. I'm very happy that, and very proud that I'm a partner with each one around the table, and we do so much work with each other, and we do work which is very innovative. We do not repeat. We actually used the circumstance. For example, I just give an example of when there was the repercussion from the war on food prices with the World Bank. We were able to utilize, one of the fast response instruments that was provided with the World Bank. If I think about EIB and other partners, we were able to put together the Sharm el-Sheikh Guidebook for Just Financing, which has principles, the definition of just financing for climate action and the principles of just financing, the country platform. So I think that each and every shock that we face has helped us together to find a practical solution that could be scaled. So when we talk about Africa and trying to replicate what has worked for us in other countries, this idea of South-South and triangular cooperation also becomes extremely important because we can save time. We can save time because in our journey, we have learned from a few things that didn't work and other things that worked. So we can save time by learning from others and also exchanging our experience with others. A lot on CBAM and competition. It's very, very difficult for emerging countries today, particularly in our place, as you are trying to move to fulfill, to localize industrialization and try and reduce some of the pressure on your financing gap or your balance of payments. You are still faced by more investments needed in these sectors to be able to face some of the restrictions from abroad. So there's an extra financing element beyond the existing one on SDGs because of different regulations across the borders. So these are really practical, difficult circumstances, and they require money. And this money is also, as we just heard, and the summit is looking at it in different ways, money is becoming expensive, rating agencies are tough, debts are going up. So I don't want to end on a gloomy note, but I'm just saying that it is not easy, and the commitment is there. The collaboration is needed, and I think among all of us, the credibility that we have is what will help us in, reform many of the constructs that exist so that we are able to face these different challenges. Thank you.
And just from our co-hosts now, Abdallah, any closing remarks?
I'd like to make a commitment in front of Mr. Mamadov that we are, as UNDP, coming to COP29 from my region with the Arab Green Financing Facility that we are setting up with UNCDF, the Islamic Development Bank, and other partners, where we would support the setting up of integrated national financing frameworks. We support the regulatory and the technical requirements for a conducive environment in each country to create, design, and build project pipeline. We will use the facility in order to design the pipeline and do even pre-feasibility and bankability studies, and then go to the financial market to try to bring the necessary and match the financing with the needs that are based on the development gaps Her Excellency spoke about. So we hope to contribute to all countries in the region and beyond. It will not be limited to the Arab countries, but it will serve that purpose of filling some of the gaps that exist in the market. And I'm actually looking at Anne, and looking at Marcus, and I'm looking at all the institutions around the room. Please, let's try to partner. It's worth it, really worth it. Thank you very much. Good luck, Egypt.
Thank you so much, Abdallah. And Marcus, over to you.
Well, not much to add, just to say that I think this session, first of all, it was great that it was not only gloom and doom, but also had positive parts. I think what was also important for us as neighbors of Egypt, the point that was made about the interconnectedness in the challenges that we face. Egypt is depending on the EU addressing the challenges identified in the Draghi report. We are dependent on Egypt addressing its challenges, and I think what this session has shown is that we're not only interconnected in the challenges, but we also can be interconnected and cooperate in the solutions of these challenges, and that innovation is not only about technology, finance, but also about approaches. So we will take a close look at this INFF, and this is probably not only an approach that works for Egypt, but also for Europe or the world, so we can all learn from each other, and I think that was the very positive takeaway from this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we've finished on time, Minister.
And can I invite everybody for a group photo this way, maybe? Yeah, okay. It's not a very nice room, but at least you can squeeze each other.